Have you ever felt like you're repeating the same emotional story over and over again, but no matter how much you try to fix it, escape it, or reframe it, you still end up in the same pain? Maybe it's the relationships that always seem to go sour, the guilt that won't leave, even when you know you did nothing wrong, the quiet self-hate hiding under perfectionism. Or maybe it's just the emotional exhaustion, this aching sense that you're carrying something too heavy for one person to bear. If that's you, you're not broken, but you are unconscious of something powerful, and that something is running the show behind the scenes. Carl Jung called it the shadow, and until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you'll call it fate. What you're about to learn will not just change how you understand your suffering, it will change how you relate to yourself. Because the truth is this: you were never meant to get rid of your darkness, you were meant to integrate it. This is not a motivational video, this is a psychological awakening. Let's begin. Most people spend their lives running from one thing, themselves. Not consciously, of course. They chase success, approval, or healing. They read books, try therapies, jump from one emotional high to another. But the core pattern doesn't change. Why? Because they're not working with the part of the psyche that actually holds the power, the unconscious, specifically the shadow self. So what is the shadow? In Jungian psychology, the shadow is the part of you that you've disowned, the parts you've rejected, suppressed, or never had the safety to express. It's your anger, your envy, your self-centeredness, but it's also your power, your sensuality, your raw, authentic instinct. Everything you learned to hide as a child, to survive, to belong, to be good. That's what formed your shadow. And here's the twist most people never realize. Just because you disowned it doesn't mean it disappeared. It's still there, right beneath the surface, shaping your emotions, hijacking your relationships, and fueling the very pain you're trying to escape. You might think your problem is anxiety, or toxic partners, or overthinking, but underneath all of it is unintegrated shadow. When you repress rage, you become passive-aggressive. When you disown ambition, you stay small and resentful. When you pretend to be happy all the time, your grief festers and poisons your joy. Jung didn't believe healing came from pretending to be positive. He believed healing came from wholeness, and wholeness means facing everything you've disowned, including the parts that scare you. This is not easy work. Shadow integration demands a radical kind of honesty. You have to be willing to say, yes, that's in me, even when it disgusts you, even when it makes you question your identity, even when it breaks your heart, because the only way to reclaim your power is to go where you lost it, and you lost it the moment you began hiding who you really were. Think about it. How many times have you told yourself, "I'm fine," when you weren't? How many times have you smiled when you wanted to scream, or agreed to something just to avoid conflict, only to feel sick with resentment afterward? These are not small acts. They are psychic fractures. Every time you betray yourself to maintain an image, you feed the shadow. You build a persona, a mask for the world to see, and the more you invest in the persona, the more estranged you become from your authentic self. Jung called the persona the social mask we wear to be accepted, but here's the paradox: the more polished your persona, the more chaotic your shadow becomes, because your psyche is always trying to balance itself. If you pretend to be the nice one, your shadow holds all the suppressed rage. If you always play the victim, your shadow may hide deep manipulative tendencies. If you're addicted to being the hero, your shadow could be carrying a profound sense of inadequacy, and all of it is unconscious. Until it erupts in a fight, in a breakdown, in a moment when you do or say something you swore you never would. And that's why shadow work is essential, not just to heal, but to survive. Because if you don't meet your shadow voluntarily, it will introduce itself through crisis, through the loss you didn't expect, the failure you couldn't prevent, the betrayal you never saw coming, not because life is cruel, but because your soul is trying to wake you up, and the only way out is through. So, how do you begin to work with your shadow? First, you stop labeling parts of yourself as bad. You start seeing everything as information. That wave of jealousy? It's not shameful, it's a message. That sudden irritation, a doorway. That emotional overreaction, a mirror. The shadow speaks in emotion, impulse, and projection. And every strong reaction is an invitation to go deeper. Let me explain projection, one of the most powerful defense mechanisms the ego uses. When you see a quality in someone else that deeply bothers you, chances are it lives in your shadow. You reject it in yourself, so you spot it everywhere around you. That's why some people seem to attract narcissists, or always find themselves surrounded by manipulators, liars, or victims. It's not fate, it's a feedback loop from the unconscious. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But most people stop at irritation. They never look inward. They stay trapped in blame, in projection, in unconscious suffering. You want to escape that trap? Then make a decision, right here, right now. Decide that you will no longer outsource your healing to others, that you will no longer wait for the world to change, for others to see you, for the pain to magically go away. Decide that you will turn inward, that you will face what you've buried, that you will reclaim what you've denied. Because the truth is, the parts of you you're most ashamed of are often the most powerful. Your anger, when integrated, becomes boundaries. Your envy becomes clarity about your desires. Your fear becomes discernment. Your sadness becomes depth. Every piece of your shadow holds a fragment of your soul. And when you bring those pieces home, you begin to feel whole. Not because life is perfect, but because you're no longer at war with yourself. That's what this course is about. Not theory, not surface-level self-help, but real psychological transformation. You don't need more positivity. You need truth. You need depth. You need to remember who you were before you started hiding. That's the work we're going to do together, step by step, layer by layer, shadow by shadow. Let's go deeper. So where do you start when the very thing you've been running from is yourself? You start by watching, not reacting, not judging, just observing. Because your shadow doesn't show up when you're trying to be perfect. It shows up in the cracks, in the moments you lose control, in the people who trigger you, in the situations that leave you feeling powerless or ashamed. These aren't setbacks. They're signals, and if you can begin to sit with them without distraction, without denial, you'll start to see something remarkable. The very emotions you thought were ruining your life are trying to point you toward the part of you that needs the most love, the most attention, the most integration. Let's take one of the most common examples, anger. Most people are terrified of their own anger. They fear it means they're dangerous, out of control, or failing as a spiritual person. But Jung didn't see anger as something to be eliminated. He saw it as a powerful messenger. When you suppress your anger, you don't become peaceful. You become passive, resentful, and vulnerable to manipulation. True inner peace comes not from avoiding anger, but from integrating it, learning what it's trying to tell you. Maybe it's telling you that your boundaries have been violated, that you've betrayed yourself to keep someone else comfortable, that you've accepted less than you deserve for far too long. That's not toxic, that's sacred. When you honor your anger, not by exploding but by listening, you reclaim your right to exist, to take up space, to say no, to protect your inner world from those who would trample it. Now imagine what would happen if you applied that same principle to all your emotions. What if instead of treating anxiety like a disease, you treated it like a compass? What if your shame wasn't a flaw to hide but a wound to tend? What if your insecurity wasn't proof you're broken, but evidence that you've never been fully seen? This is the shift shadow work demands. From repression to reclamation, from fear to presence. And this presence, it changes everything. When you're present with your shadow, something strange starts to happen. You stop taking everything so personally. You stop trying to fix everyone else. You stop engaging in emotional drama that drains your energy. You begin to recognize when someone's criticism is actually their own projection. You stop reacting out of woundedness and start responding from awareness, and that, right there, is emotional mastery. Because mastering your mind doesn't mean controlling every thought. It means understanding where your thoughts come from. It means recognizing that the stories you tell yourself about your worth, your past, your future, aren't facts. They're often unconscious scripts written by your shadow, and you can rewrite them, but only if you're willing to look at the source. Jung believed that every neurosis, every compulsion, every unexplained fear is trying to lead you back to something you've forgotten, something you've buried. And this is where it gets spiritual, because the shadow isn't just a psychological construct, it's a sacred guide. It contains your most primal instincts, your creativity, your sensuality, your capacity to love without conditions, your ability to say, "This is who I am," without apology. And the more of your shadow you integrate, the more soul you recover. But let's be honest, this process is not glamorous. It doesn't come with instant results or social validation. In fact, the deeper you go, the more resistance you'll meet, not just from others, but from within. The ego hates this kind of work. It wants control, image, superiority. It thrives on comparison, judgment, and illusion. And the shadow threatens all of that. Because the shadow brings you face to face with your humanity, with the parts of you that hurt, that rage, that long, that bleed. And most people aren't ready for that level of vulnerability. But you're not most people. You wouldn't be here if you weren't ready to wake up. You wouldn't be listening to this if some deeper part of you wasn't aching for truth. Not comfort, not affirmation, but truth. And here's the truth. Your pain has meaning. Your patterns are not random. The loops you're stuck in, the toxic relationships, the emotional reactivity, the deep loneliness that no one sees, are all symptoms of a split psyche, a disconnection between the self you show the world and the self that lives in the shadows. And integration isn't about fixing that disconnection. It's about ending the war between them. You've probably heard the term inner child. That's one layer of shadow work, healing the part of you that was abandoned, shamed, or denied growing up. But the shadow goes even deeper. It's not just about what happened to you. It's about how you responded, what you internalized, what you decided you had to become in order to be loved, or at least to survive. And every time you chose safety over authenticity, a part of you went underground. That's where your shadow was born. And that's why this work is so essential. Because as long as those parts stay underground, you will remain fragmented, outwardly functioning, maybe even successful, but inwardly haunted by questions you can't answer, by feelings you can't name, by a sense of incompleteness that nothing external can fix. But when you bring your shadow into the light, when you stop running from your guilt, your fear, your rage, your need, you begin to feel whole again, not perfect, but whole. That's the real goal of shadow work. Not moral purity, not spiritual bypassing, but radical self-acceptance. Jung called this process individuation, becoming who you really are, beneath the roles, the masks, the conditioning. Not a copy, not a projection, but a living embodiment of your own truth. And individuation cannot happen without the shadow. In fact, the shadow is the gateway, the initiation, the test. If you avoid it, you stay stuck in falsehood. If you embrace it, you begin to transform. And make no mistake, this is transformation, not the kind that looks pretty on the outside, but the kind that shakes you to your core, the kind that burns illusions to the ground, the kind that forces you to grieve who you thought you were, so that you can step into who you truly are. This isn't for everyone, but it is for you, because something inside you already knows. There's more to you than your pain, more to you than your past, more to you than the mask you've been wearing just to get by. And the moment you stop seeing your shadow as a threat and start seeing it as a teacher, that's when everything begins to shift. Because when you master your shadow, you don't just master your mind, you reclaim your soul. So how do you bring the shadow into the light? You begin by asking better questions, not the kind that start with "what's wrong with me," but the kind that start with "what is this emotion trying to tell me?" You ask, where did I learn to hate this part of myself? You ask, whose approval did I need to keep in order to disown my truth? And you sit with the answers, not to judge them, but to understand them. Because when you understand the origin of your shame, your fear, your self-rejection, you start to reclaim your agency. The moment you realize your patterns had a purpose, even if that purpose was survival, you begin to forgive yourself, and self-forgiveness is where real healing starts. You see, the shadow isn't inherently bad. That's a lie we've all been fed by a culture obsessed with appearances. The shadow is simply the part of you that had to go underground because the world didn't make room for it. It's your exiled self, your hidden gold. And when you make space for that part of you to come back, you don't become less of who you are. You become more grounded, more intuitive, more emotionally honest. You stop living from performance and start living from presence. And that changes how you relate to others too. When you've met your own shadow, you become far less reactive to the shadows of others. You stop needing to win arguments. You stop taking things personally. You stop trying to prove your worth through overgiving or over-explaining. You start to recognize projection in real time. You can say, "This isn't about me," and mean it. That's a superpower in a world built on emotional codependency. You become the grounded one, the clear one, the one who doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't play psychological ping pong with someone else's unprocessed trauma. But here's something most people don't tell you. Shadow work is messy. It's not linear. It's not something you check off your to-do list. You'll have days when you feel like you're going backward. You'll uncover things about yourself that make you want to run. You'll realize that some of the roles you've played, caretaker, victim, martyr, perfectionist, were masks you wore to avoid the deeper truth. And when those masks start to fall off, it can feel like your entire identity is crumbling. That's normal. That's necessary, because you can't build a new self on top of an old lie. You have to strip it down to the bones. You have to let the false self die. And in that death you find something sacred. You find the part of you that was never wounded, never ashamed, never abandoned. The part of you that's been waiting all along. And no, it's not some idealized higher self that floats above all your pain. It's the deeper self. The one who holds the pain without collapsing. The one who knows that your darkness is not the opposite of your light. It's the soil from which your light grows. That's the paradox. The more you run from your shadow, the more control it has. But the moment you turn toward it, not to fight it, but to listen, you start to reclaim your life. You realize that your triggers are maps. Your breakdowns are breakthroughs. Your emotional chaos is a call home. And the part of you that used to sabotage everything good, that part softens when it's seen. It doesn't need to act out anymore because it finally has a seat at the table. So let's talk practically. How do you work with the shadow day to day? It starts with awareness. Track your emotional reactions. When something upsets you more than it should, pause. Ask, what am I feeling? What story am I telling myself about this? And most importantly, when have I felt this before? Trace it back. Get curious. Not with blame, but with compassion. Because your shadow isn't trying to destroy you, it's trying to protect a wound. And until that wound is seen, it will keep hijacking your behavior. Second, make space for what you feel. Not just intellectually, but somatically. Feel it in your body. Let it move through you without judgment. Cry if you need to, scream into a pillow, write it out, but don't rush to fix it. Let the energy complete its cycle. Emotions are not meant to be controlled, they're meant to be metabolized. And your body knows how to do that. if you stop interrupting it with shame or distraction. Third, notice your projections. Who triggers you? Who do you envy? Who do you judge? Instead of fixating on them, ask what they mirror back to you. That person you call arrogant? Maybe they express confidence you were never allowed to have. That person you resent for taking up space, maybe they reflect a freedom you secretly crave. Every person you react to intensely is a mirror. And once you start using those mirrors consciously, your shadow becomes your greatest teacher. And finally, practice radical honesty with yourself. Stop pretending to be more evolved than you are. Stop performing. Stop curating your life to fit an image. That's the ego's game. The shadow doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to be real. It needs you to admit when you're jealous, bitter, scared, controlling. Not to stay in those states, but to understand them, to hold them with presence, because when you can sit with the darkest parts of yourself without running, something incredible happens. You stop abandoning yourself. And when you stop abandoning yourself, you become unstoppable. Not because life gets easier, but because you're no longer at war within. Your energy is no longer leaking out through shame spirals, people-pleasing, or emotional reactivity. You're no longer chasing wholeness through validation or achievement. You become centered, clear, unshakable, and people feel it. They don't always understand it, but they feel it. Because someone who's integrated their shadow radiates something rare: presence without performance, strength without armor, depth without pretense. This is what Jung meant when he said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not the version of you shaped by fear, not the version of you curated for approval, but the version of you that includes everything: light and dark, sacred and messy, soft and fierce. That's wholeness. And that's what shadow work makes possible. So, as we go deeper into this course, keep one thing in mind. Your shadow is not your enemy. It's your invitation. An invitation to come home, to stop living in fragments, to stop hiding behind masks, to stop outsourcing your power to people, to systems, to stories that no longer serve you. The world doesn't need another perfect persona. The world needs you, the real you, the one you've been running from, the one you're about to meet. By now, you may be starting to sense just how deep this process goes. Shadow work isn't just about emotional healing, it's about reclaiming your inner authority, the power to know yourself so fully, so honestly, that no one outside of you can define who you are ever again. And this changes the game in every part of your life. Your relationships start to shift. You stop attracting people who mirror your wounds and start connecting with those who resonate with your wholeness. Your boundaries become clear, not as walls to protect a fragile ego, but as expressions of your self-respect. You no longer feel the need to explain why you say no. You don't overextend yourself trying to be liked. You stop tolerating emotional crumbs because you've finally come into contact with the part of you that knows what you're worth. Not in theory, in practice, in your body, in your choices. And this kind of integrity, it's magnetic, not because it tries to be, but because it's rare. You see, we live in a world obsessed with surface, with likes, filters, personas. A world where healing is often reduced to affirmations and quick fixes. But real inner work doesn't happen on the surface. It happens in the dark. It happens when you're willing to sit with your own discomfort instead of running from it. When you stop trying to be the version of yourself that everyone else approves of and start becoming the version that feels true in your bones. It's in that moment, when you stop editing yourself for external consumption, that you begin to taste freedom. Because freedom isn't just the ability to do what you want. It's the courage to be who you are, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's messy, even when it scares you. But don't mistake this for a path of constant progress. Integration isn't linear. One day you might feel empowered, whole, like you're finally getting it, and the next you find yourself back in an old pattern, overwhelmed, triggered, ashamed. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you're human. Every layer of shadow you uncover brings you closer to your center. It's like peeling an onion. Sometimes it stings. Sometimes you cry. But underneath each layer is another chance to meet yourself, to love what was once unlovable, to hold what was once too heavy to touch. And this work, it doesn't just affect you. When you do shadow work, you stop passing your pain down to others. You stop projecting your unmet needs onto your partner. You stop unconsciously replaying your childhood wounds with your own children. You stop blaming the world for what you haven't faced within. This is how generational cycles are broken. Not through blame and not through silence, but through conscious reckoning, through choosing to feel what your ancestors couldn't, to heal what was never healed before. That is sacred work, and it doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. So many people ask, how do I know if I'm doing shadow work right? And the answer is simple. Are you getting more honest with yourself? Are you learning to sit with your discomfort instead of numbing it? Are you taking responsibility for your reactions, your projections, your patterns? Are you starting to feel less like a victim of life and more like a participant in your own evolution? If yes, even a little, then you're on the path. It's not about getting it right, it's about showing up. Every time you choose awareness over avoidance, every time you respond instead of react, every time you meet your own pain with compassion instead of shame, you're doing the work. And one of the most powerful ways to deepen this work is through your relationships, because nothing will trigger your shadow faster than intimacy. Love has a way of exposing every unhealed wound, every unspoken need, every buried insecurity, not to torture you, but to give you a chance to grow. So the next time you find yourself blaming your partner, your friend, or your parent for how you feel, pause, ask yourself, what part of me is being activated right now? What memory does this feeling remind me of? Is this person really the problem, or are they showing me something I haven't yet accepted in myself? This kind of inquiry takes courage. It's far easier to stay in blame, to label the other person as toxic or avoidant or narcissistic. And yes, sometimes they are. But often, what we call toxicity is just incompatibility mixed with our own unresolved pain. That doesn't mean you should tolerate mistreatment. It means you look inward first, not to excuse their behavior, but to understand your own. Because when you understand your own emotional landscape, you stop getting lost in other people's storms. And this brings us to one of the most underestimated aspects of shadow work, grief. When you start to integrate your shadow, you will grieve. You'll grieve the years you spent hiding. You'll grieve the relationships that were built on a false self. You'll grieve the life you could have lived if only you'd known what you know now. And that grief, it's real. It deserves space. Don't rush through it. Don't try to bypass it with spiritual cliches or premature gratitude. Let yourself mourn. Because that mourning is part of the rebirth. You can't fully embrace who you're becoming until you've made peace with who you've been. And maybe that's the deepest gift of shadow work. It reconnects you with your humanity. In a world that encourages perfection, projection, and performance, it reminds you that your messiness is not a flaw, it's a doorway. That your emotional depth is not a weakness, it's a guide. That your darkness is not your enemy, it's your birthright. And the more you own it, the more free you become. So don't be afraid of the shadow. Be afraid of never knowing yourself. Be afraid of spending your life performing a version of you that feels hollow. Be afraid of dying with your truth still buried inside. Because this isn't just about healing your mind. It's about liberating your soul. It's about walking through the fire of your own truth and emerging with something no one can take from you. Inner authority, emotional mastery, and the quiet, unshakable power of a self fully known. This is what it means to master your shadow. This is what it means to master your mind. If you've made it this far, you're already in the minority. Not because you've figured everything out, but because you've stopped pretending that you don't need to. You've stepped outside the illusion that self-acknowledge is optional. You've chosen to look inward instead of endlessly seeking distractions or blaming your circumstances. And that choice alone puts you on the path Jung called individuation, the rarest, most courageous path a human being can walk. Because it's not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming what you were before the world told you to be someone else. It's about peeling back the layers of conditioning, trauma, and performance until you meet the essence of who you've always been. And that essence, it's not all light. In fact, much of what you find will challenge the story you've built about yourself. You may discover that your generosity was sometimes a mask for control, that your independence was born out of distrust, that your confidence was built on overcompensation. These realizations can sting, but they also liberate, because when you finally tell the truth about where your patterns come from, you stop being controlled by them. You stop needing to defend them. You create space for choice, for change, for new ways of being. This is why Jung emphasized self-awareness not as a luxury, but as a necessity. He knew that without it, we are doomed to repeat our wounds. Unconsciously, compulsively, endlessly. The relationships may change, the circumstances may shift, but the story stays the same until you interrupt it. And shadow work is that interruption. It's the pause in the pattern. It's the moment you say, no more. I will not live this script one more day. I will not let my past dictate my future. I will not abandon myself just to be accepted by people who don't even see me. That is the moment something inside you wakes up. And once it does, it cannot go back to sleep. But make no mistake, awakening is not blissful. At least, not at first. It's raw. It's disorienting. You may feel more lost before you feel found, more broken before you feel whole, because what you're doing is dismantling the false self. And that self, the one you constructed to survive, to be liked, to stay safe, will fight for its life. It will scream. It will sabotage. It will try to pull you back into familiar suffering, not because it's evil, but because it's afraid. It was built in fear. And what it fears most is the unknown, the unconditioned, the uncontrollable. But you can hold that fear. You don't need to resist it or fix it, just be with it. Listen to what it's trying to protect. Underneath every self-sabotaging behavior is a story that once served you, a belief that once kept you safe. And your job now is not to judge those beliefs, but to update them, to look them in the eye and say, thank you for getting me this far, but I don't need you anymore. I choose something different now. And what you choose next, it matters. Because shadow work, for all its depth and introspection, is not meant to keep you navel-gazing. It's meant to bring you back to life, to relationships, to passion, to purpose, to the part of you that knows why you're here. Because your shadow doesn't just contain pain. It contains your calling. It holds the energy of the gifts you've suppressed, the dreams you've denied, the truths you were told were too much. And once integrated, those gifts return to you. They begin to animate your life from the inside out. You start to create not from fear, but from alignment. You speak not to be heard, but because you have something real to say. You give not to earn worth, but because you are overflowing. That's when people start to notice something different about you. They may not be able to name it, but they feel it. Your energy is clearer, your presence more grounded. You no longer shrink in the face of conflict or chase the highs of approval. You've become someone who can hold the contradictions of life without falling apart. Someone who can sit with joy and grief in the same breath. Someone who doesn't need to be fixed because you've stopped seeing yourself as broken. But here's the final truth you must understand. This work never ends. There is no finish line, no moment when you've integrated every shadow and are finally done. Because the psyche is alive, it evolves. And with every new phase of life, new parts of the shadow emerge. What was unconscious yesterday may become conscious today, only for a deeper layer to reveal itself tomorrow. That's not regression. That's growth. That's the rhythm of transformation. And if you can accept that, if you can let go of the fantasy of being complete, you unlock something even more powerful: peace with the process. Because now you know how to meet yourself, no matter what comes up. You know how to sit in the dark without needing to escape it. You know how to own your story without becoming it. You know how to forgive yourself without letting yourself off the hook. And most importantly, you know how to begin again. That's what makes you unstoppable. Not perfection, but resilience. Not certainty, but curiosity. Not control, but connection with your own inner truth. So if you're still wondering why shadow work, let me answer it this way. Because it brings you home. Not to the version of you others wanted, not to the image you've projected, but to the core of who you are. The part of you that never needed to be anything other than real. That is the power of this work. That is the invitation. And that is what Jung meant when he said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Enlightenment isn't about escaping the shadow. It's about embracing it so completely that even your darkness becomes a source of light. So where does that leave you now? Hopefully in a place of deeper awareness of who you are, what you've carried, and what's truly possible when you stop running from yourself. Because now you understand, your pain was never random. Your triggers were never meaningless. And those emotional cycles you thought were signs of failure, they were invitations, repetitions with a purpose, not to punish you, but to wake you up, to make you curious, to force you to finally look inward. And what you found there, the shadow, is not a curse. It's your most honest teacher. One that never lies to you. One that doesn't care about your reputation, your spiritual image, or your performance. It only cares about truth. You now see that emotional mastery isn't about feeling good all the time. It's about having a conscious relationship with all your emotions, especially the ones that scare you. Especially the ones that society told you to avoid. Anger, jealousy, grief, shame. These aren't weaknesses, they're signals. And when you stop trying to repress or transcend them, when you finally bring them into the light of your awareness, they start to evolve. Your anger becomes clarity. Your shame becomes compassion. Your fear becomes wisdom. This is how the shadow transforms. Not by being denied, but by being embraced. And it's that embrace of your full self that begins to change everything around you, because integrated people show up differently. They listen better. They love deeper. They don't project their unhealed wounds onto everyone around them. They don't need to control, manipulate, or posture. They carry a quiet strength that doesn't need to shout. And that kind of strength, it's felt. You walk into a room and people sense something in you, not because you're perfect, but because you're whole. And in that wholeness, you find something else, something deeper than happiness, something steadier than confidence. You find peace. Not the kind that comes from avoiding life's chaos, but the kind that comes from knowing that no matter what chaos arises, you won't abandon yourself. That's emotional sovereignty. That's the kind of power no one can take from you. And the beautiful irony is that the only way to get there is to do the very thing you were never taught to do. Feel fully, honestly, without numbing, without bypassing, without apologizing. This is your inner revolution. One that won't be loud, one that probably won't get applause, but one that will change the trajectory of your life. Because when you've met your shadow, you stop being afraid of life's uncertainty. You stop needing everyone to like you. You stop reacting like a puppet to every external stimulus. You begin to act from presence, from truth, from choice. And that's where your real life begins. You may notice too that the people in your life start to shift. Some will get uncomfortable with the new you, the you who sets boundaries, who speaks truth, who no longer plays the roles they relied on. That's okay. Let them go. Anyone who needs the disempowered version of you to feel secure isn't truly with you, and the ones who are meant to walk this next chapter with you, they will rise to meet the new standard. You don't have to force it. Just keep doing your work. Keep integrating. Keep choosing wholeness over comfort, because you're not just healing for yourself. You're breaking unconscious chains that go back generations. And maybe, just maybe, that's part of your purpose. Not to be perfect, not to always feel good, but to live honestly, to love with depth, to carry your truth like a torch even when it would be easier to hide it, to be the one in your family, in your lineage, in your circle who says, it stops with me. The denial, the shame, the pretending. I'm going to feel it, I'm going to face it, and I'm going to walk through it so the next chapter of this story can be written differently. That's the kind of quiet heroism this world needs more of, not the hero who slays dragons out there, but the one who slays illusions within, the one who's brave enough to sit with their shadow and come back to the world softer, not harder, clearer, not colder, grounded in who they are, and compassionate toward those still running from themselves. So, if no one's told you this before, let me say it now. You're doing the work, the real work, the soul work, and that matters, even when no one sees it, especially then, because the shadow loves silence, it thrives in hiding, and every time you turn toward it, name it and integrate it, you reclaim something precious, your life force, your vitality, your truth. That's what makes you dangerous to a system built on repression. That's what makes you a light in a world addicted to denial. And maybe that's the deeper meaning of master your shadow, master your mind. It's not about becoming invulnerable, it's about becoming real. So real that you no longer need to defend yourself. So whole that you no longer need to chase approval. So conscious that no pattern can hold you hostage anymore. Carl Jung didn't offer this work as a comfort. He offered it as a path that requires everything of you, and in return gives you back everything you thought you lost. Your strength, your authenticity, your freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the deeper freedom to no longer be at war with yourself. This is your path now. You've already begun, and every moment you choose truth over performance, awareness over reaction, depth over avoidance, you're walking it. You don't need anyone's permission to continue. You don't need to wait for the right time, you're already doing it. And the more you trust yourself, the more your shadow becomes not a threat, but a companion. So here's what I'll leave you with. You are not your wounds. You are not your mistakes. You are not your persona, your roles, or the image you've worked so hard to maintain. You are what remains when all of that falls away. And that part of you, the one you meet in silence, in stillness, in the shadow, that's the part that was never lost. That's the part that's finally coming home. Now walk forward with that truth, with that clarity, and with that power.